So, hello and welcome then to this latest event in the seminar series on translation for children, which is co-organised by the Centre for Book Cultures and Publishing here at the University of Reading in the UK and Outside in Worlds. And today we're very excited to explore Jaime Gamboa and Wen Shu's El Cuento Fantasma. Excuse many apologies for my Spanish pronunciation, and how it became the Invisible Story, but published just recently by Lantana. And its selection as part of the Outside in World Reading the Way project. So we're joined by a wonderful set of speakers tonight, and we're going to as each of us comes on to speak, we will describe ourselves as well. So I'm a middle-aged academic in a tweed jacket with very messy yellow hair and dangly earrings. And so my name's Sophie Hayward from the Centre for Book Cultures and Publishing. And we're joined, first of all, we're going to hear from Daniel Hahn, who'll be reading us from his translation of the book. And he's a celebrated British writer, editor, and translator. And in 2020, he was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire for services to literature. And then in 2023, he won the Ottaway Award for the promotion of international literature. And then we're going to hear from the author and illustrator of the original Spanish language book. So that's Jaime Gamboa, who is an award-winning Costa Rican author and musician. And his books have been translated into English, Danish, Korean, Japanese, Turkish, Chinese, and French. And he's joined by Wen Shu, who is a Costa Rican artist and architect who graduated with BFA honours from the Rhode Island School of Design. Her watercolour and cutout paper technique has earned her multiple awards, including the Grand Prize at the NOMA Concours 2008. And then afterwards, we're going to hear from Outside in World. So Alex Strick from Outside in World, who's a children's book author, consultant reviewer, and co-founder of Outside in World, with a real passion for putting children's voices and views first. And in that spirit, very much, she is joined by Kyla Lawrence. Thank you so much, Kyla, for joining us, who's a student at New College, Worcester, the independent school for students aged 11 to 19 who are blind or partially sighted, and she's an enthusiastic Braille reader. And then at the end, we're going to hear again from Daniel, who's going to talk to us about the translation itself and how he did it. So it's a packed roster. So what I'm going to do is just hand over very quickly to Patricia, and then we'll get into hearing a reading from the book. Thank you very much. Oh, and just to say, please do switch off your cameras and your microphones just to help us. But you make full use of the chat. Do let us know where you're coming in from and who you are and so forth. That's always lovely to hear from you. Okay, Patricia, thank you.
Thanks so much. This is Patricia Billings. I'm a 6-year-old white woman with a growing out mullet hairdo, a pink dress, a lot of tattoos, and an invisible vest. I'm doing something invisible, and the book is behind me. I love this book so much. Thank you from Outside in World to Sophie and the Center for Book Cultures and Publishing for being the most amazing and cherished co-organizers of this webinar series that's dedicated to our mutual mission to cultivate deeper study of, education on, and advocacy for children's literature and translation. Just a reminder to everybody to turn off who's not speaking. So to turn on cameras and mute. And our true thanks to you, all of you present here, for making this such a vibrant community hub, this webinar series. I'm co-introducing, as a trustee and longtime colleague of Outside in World, the organization dedicated to exploring, promoting, and celebrating children's books in translation. Our book and topic today come directly out of OIW's groundbreaking Reading the Way project, which I was honored to be a reviewer for in 2014. It was a life-changing experience. Our gratitude to our panelists for your brilliant, heartful, impactful work and for sharing your wisdom and practice with us today. Now, over to translator Daniel Hahn, who will read us the book. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Patricia and Sophie and everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I should also thank Jaime and Wen Shu for this book, which This is the first time we've met, and I haven't had the opportunity to say what an amazing thing I think it is and how proud I am to have been involved in it. I'm going to be talking at the end of this hour about the actual process of translating, but we thought it might be nice to start off just to give you a chance to hear the book and have a look at the illustrations just quickly before we get going, just so that while you're having you're listening to the conversation with the other speakers, you have some sense of the book if you don't know it already. So I'm just going to read through the whole thing briskly. I hope you can see that. This is just to give you an idea of what it is we're all going to be talking about for the next hour or so. And if you can't see that, I hope someone will tell me.
It's looking great. Yeah.
An Invisible Story, written by Jaime Gamboa, illustrated by Chen. The world is full of stories. Some are as long as lizards, others so short that they never even make it to the end. There are stories as different as the feathers of birds, or people's faces, or the uncountable leaves on a great fig tree. But the story in this book was something else. This story had never, ever been read. It lived hidden away in a dark corner of the library, far from where the famous tales shone, tales that were filled with beautiful pictures or written in letters of gold. These tales would often spend their afternoons arguing which of them was the most popular, which was the most read, which was the best loved. Our little story listened from the shadows, filled with wonder, and it sighed how it wanted to be like them. Whenever the eyes of a reader approached the shelves, our story would begin to quiver like a leaf in the wind, hiding its spine and repeating to itself, "I'm just a ghost, nobody can see me. I'm just a ghost, nobody can see me." And it was true. People really did walk right past. It was as if our little story didn't exist at all. But one day, a reader appeared who was different. She began to run her fingers along all the covers, one by one. The story could feel her getting closer, and it knew. This time it would not be able to escape. When she touched the story's spine, the girl smiled. Then she took it off the shelf, but just as she was about to open it, the story called out, "Stop right there! I'm a ghost." The girl was frightened and nearly dropped the book, but after a moment, she said quite firmly, "There's no such thing as ghosts. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read." "No, please don't," begged the story, trembling. "I'm scared. I don't want to end." The girl laughed, a laugh that was as bright as a butterfly. "Who put that silly idea into your head? Stories don't really end. They can be read as many times as you want. And besides," but the story didn't let her finish. "The truth is," it said quietly, "my pages are blank." But then the girl placed her fingers on the cover and began, with great care, to open it. "May I?" And the story, soothed by the girl's crystal voice, allowed her to open its hard cover. It was true there were no words written in ink on its pages, nor any shining pictures. The story believed that it was empty, but it was not. Its pages overflowed with tiny prick holes, making hundreds of small raised bumps. "You've never been read before, have you?" asked the girl. The book shook one of its pages. "You weren't made for just anybody. Your wonderful story is not read with the eyes." And right there, to the book's astonishment and delight, the girl started to read the magical story that was contained within its pages, written in Braille, the language you read with your fingertips. Happily, the invisible story now understood that no one story was better than any other, that they were just different. As different as the feathers of birds, or people's faces, or the uncountable leaves on a great fig tree.
Thank you so much. Shall we move on now to Jaime? I'm going to spotlight you.
Thank you, Patricia. And thank you, Daniel. Wow, what a reading, what a beautiful reading you have made. So, well, I'm Jaime Gamboa. I'm the writer of the author of the Invisible Story, the ghost story. The ghost story original was the original name in Spanish, El Cuento Fantasma. I am talking to you from Costa Rica. I am in Heredia, Costa Rica, Central America. But yeah, and I have a small presentation just to show you where I come from. And I think it will help some way to explain, help me to explain how this story comes from, because it's very tied to my origin and my personal story. I am not visually impaired, but I think there are some things in my origins and my life that explain where this story comes from. I am from Costa Rica. I am showing a map from of America. Costa Rica is this tiny little country in this stripe of land in the middle of the American continent, Central America. And Costa Rica is one of the smallest countries in this stripe of land. But I am not only Costa Rican. You know, Costa Rica is just 50,000 square kilometers. But in this small place, there are center and peripheral provinces. I am from the province of Guanacaste, that is the northeast. For us, very far from the center of the country where there are the capital city. And when I was a kid, to travel to go from San Jose, that is the capital, to Guanacaste, take 6 hours by car to reach Guanacaste, and another hour or 2 hours to reach the home of my family. So it was not near, and the costume, the way of life in Guanacaste is very different, and there are some cultural patterns that are very different from the center of the country, from the way the citizens of the capital live and do things, you know. So when I was young, I went to study to the capital, but my roots were in Guanacaste, in this province. And when in the relations with my with the other kids in the school and in the high school also, I start to notice with my brothers, we start to notice some things that were weird, because we became conscious that we were the others. We are the strangers in our own country, because we here different music. We use different words. We have different ways to eat, things to eat, or so that conscience that we were the others um, make us start to feel in some way discriminated because our music was seen. I was a musician. I was in a conservatory, but when I played the music from my homeland, from our town, from the countryside, the people in the capital city said, "What is that? This ugly music. What, what is the meaning of that?" So, what this have to do with the invisible story? Well, all right. I uh, I noticed from my early young age that the people doesn't get doesn't used to get the importance of be open to the other, to this other with capital O, ¿verdad? The other people, the people that brings you different things, that the people that think different, that speaks different languages, that have different ways to live or seeing the life, that came with different religions, whose skin are different colors. So I became aware of the hard and heavy weight of the rejection of the difference. And that amazed me in a bad way. Why? Why the people is like this? Why they reject what is different? And I think this is the seed I carry on many years until I started to write the invisible story, because this story started with an image in my mind like this, like thinking the world is a large library, is a place full of stories, full of different ways to see the life. Um, and you can choose to uh, see and to adopt and be open to the different, or you can choose just the languages you know, the things you know about it. You can hear just the music you hear in your city or in the radios, or you can choose to step, make a step away and open your mind and your heart and to the things are outside in the world. So I started with that picture in my mind, and why? Oh, all right. There is a book that is different. Why is different? And I have to confess that the issue of the visual impaired, the braille, and that thing emerges when I was writing. The invisible story talked to me in some way. Hey, this is one book that anybody can read unless it has the code, it has the sensibility, it has the openness, the capabilities, the different capabilities that makes you capable to read the book. So, of course, years before I wrote the Invisible Story, I have met a visual impaired lawyer that impressed me, reading the whole laws in Costa Rica in Braille, and wow, I have been amazed by that. But these two things crush in my mind, and this is the origin of this book. So everything makes a hot pot in my mind, and everything reduced to this simple idea. You can see the world or think about the world as a place when everything is is as I can see it. But if I try to put myself in the feet of other people, I can discover that the world is full of colors, different than the colors, the only colors I can see. So that is the end of the story. That the story that where the reader can think about the diversity, to embrace the diversity, to open their minds to those who are different, and that is the purpose, yeah, I pursue with this story. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jaime. That was fascinating. Would you mind just quickly describing yourself? I suddenly realized we forgot to ask you to do that.
Well, I am 60-year-old young man, curly hair, curly brown hair, I think, not gray yet. I am wearing a blue shirt, and there's a painting of my brother Hector behind me, depicts traditions from Costa Rica, La Giganta. So
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you so much. Okay, so I'm now going to move us to Wen Su, who's going to talk to us about the illustrations. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Patricia. My name is Wen, and I'm Taiwanese Costa Rican. So I look East Asian, but I'm wearing my pre-Columbian chipcha earrings and a very Latin American blouse. I think everybody can recognize it. So first of all, I want to thank the whole team. This has been great. I'm kind of nervous and I'm very excited, but a little bit nervous too. So bear with me. I wanted to thank Daniel because when he was reading the story, the first time I read the story, when they sent me the text, it was very moving. And now it's been 11 years from that. And now that I heard Daniel reading it, it was beautiful, but it was like mostly for me, it was super moving. In the end, like I'm not crying, of course, but you can feel it welling up. And I also wanted to thank beautiful story, and it's been a long time, but it's still like the emotions are still very fresh with it. I'm gonna share. I have bring a little presentation, and let's see. Sorry about this. Yeah. So I wanted to through a little bit through the process because it takes quite a process. And I think the most challenging part about this book was the idea of a story that was invisible and dealing with things that we cannot see with our eyes, but we can feel or sense otherwise, right? And so it involved a lot of sketches. So this is the first sketches that I came up with. it's a lot of brainstorming, storming, a lot of trial and error. And so how do you draw what is invisible, right? And in this case, it's also how do you draw something that's not tangible, that resides in another realm, right? In the realm of the emotional, of the imagination. And so we started sketching, like you can see that little octopus ghost, because the original title in Spanish was El Cuento Fantasma, which means the ghost story. So you can see the little ghosts everywhere. And like my sketchbook was full of that. And then the idea, the one that's underneath, the one that where the book, where the story is hiding inside the physical book, that was the one that resonated a little bit more for me and the art director, who was wonderful. This whole time, it was a very, very close relationship between me and the art director, Valia, because this was a challenge, right? And how do you draw a story as a character? It's not, you're not drawing the character in a story, you're drawing the story as a character. So then we move on to, we kept exploring, and we did more sketching. And in this case, so it is not just the story as a character, but also like the contents of the story. And in this case, we don't have the contents of the story, of the invisible story, but we do know what a story, like we can sense what a story is. So it came to the question of what is a story? What makes us a story? A story is a journey. A story can be a lesson. It can be, like Jaime said, a different point of view, the point of view from somebody that's other than us, but not because they're other than us, we're going to reject them. The idea is that you can enter this wonderful world that you did not know about. So for me, in this case, the story was like, it's the first spark for your imagination. Like it can go as wide and as far as your imagination. And the story is like the seed for your imagination to fly. So that's where the idea of the fig tree and the birds and the feathers like sprouting out of the tree. So then it came to, well, we did even more sketching. This whole process, I think most of the time at the beginning was spent just like exploring and experimenting and trying to find visual solutions for this big, I want to say a problem, this challenge of trying to illustrate or to put in visuals what's something that is intangible. Like that was the main thing. And so we wanted to see, because this is a story that's invisible to the eyes, how can we feel through our other senses that are not sight, right? So we have, of course, the other main senses, or the senses that most people know about, which is hearing, touch, taste, and I'm missing another one. Okay, so, but then we also have the sense, we can sense the space from other senses that are not so well known. And yes, the Trinity College Library was an inspiration for the space, because that came from Valia, from like the art director, because I was struggling with, okay, how do I represent the feeling of space? And she sent me this beautiful photo, and it just like, you look at the photo and you can just imagine what it would be like to just enter that vault of like, that great vault of books and just wood and light and color, even with your eyes closed. Like all of us have had the experience of walking into a certain room, and you can sense the space, not just with your eyes, but with all your other senses, right? And can we see colors in our mind? Can we translate like scents or aromas into colors, into shapes? Can we take the boundaries of a certain situation and turn them into an actual like resource for us to be free, like to be freer, to explore more, right? So these are all like questions that came up when we were working on it. And you could see that, for example, so this is, you see the space is very structured, it's very orderly. The idea is to give like a sense of depth, but also then there was this flicker of something that was intangible, something that's not of this same realm of things that are tangible, and that is more about the other side, Okay, so at first I tried to experiment with a more subtle thing. You can see it on the sketch in the bottom left. It was done with dried petals, but then it lacked color, like it lacked contrast. So we tried it with torn paper that was colored. And I think we can talk about, oh yeah, so at that time we can talk a little bit about technique. You can see that, hang on, sorry. You can see that there's two types of interventions with paper. One is like very hard, like really clean edge cut paper, and the other one is torn paper. And how we came up with these two ideas is that at the moment I was doing a lot of paper cuts, and these are the paper cuts I was doing. Like it was very colorful, and it came from, on the bottom left you can see that's a very traditional technique of Chinese paper cuts for New Year's. They use them to decorate the windows for New Year's Eve. And it's just paper, rice paper that has been cut out, and they watercolor it or wash it. And in my case, I took that technique and that traditional technique, and I translated it into children's book. And because I'm Latin American and because I'm East Asian, like my palette was always very colorful. It's just something that I cannot help it. It comes out like that. And then for the torn paper, I had taken like a little handicraft course of torn haruki paper. Haruki paper, a Japanese paper made with kozo fibers, which are very long. So once you tear them, you can see like the ragged edges a lot better. And then you color it. So these two, I brought them in to, well, I think this one illustrates it better, to the idea of, okay, we're gonna have colored paper, we're gonna have cut paper, but we're not gonna color it this time. It was very hard to me not to go in with color because that's just like against my nature. But then we're just gonna accent the other realm. Like we have this physical realm, and then we have this other realm of imagination and emotion and feeling. And we're going to color it and make it with torn paper. So that contrast was enough to play, playing around with that contrast was enough to make the story dynamic and interesting, and trying to like portray what are in the words, but also in the imagination of somebody who's looking at the book and or reading the book. And so once we got that down, then it was just a matter of working with this style, and it was a lot of fun, I have to admit. Like the part of sketching, the first step was to sketch the space in which like everything was going to happen, and then after that you would I'm not saying sure of the word in English, but you would put on top of it the sketch of what would be the torn paper, the color, the blasts of imagination, and then I would cut out the physical part, and then I would hand torn and then hand paint all the other ones. So overlay. Thank you so much. And that's it. That's part of the process. If you have any questions, I guess we can do questions in the end. And I have to say thank you again, because the story is wonderful, and it was, as a challenge, it was hard in the beginning, but it was then later on a very, very satisfying journey and very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wen, and thank you both to Wen and Jaime for this beautiful book and for taking us through it. Was just really fascinating and lovely. And now I'm going to hand over to Alex, and so I'm going to spotlight you. And so I'll hand over to you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Alex. I'm an author, a reviewer, one of the original co-founders of Outside In World. For those of you who can't see me, I'm a middle-aged woman with, I'd like to say natural hair, very heavily dyed, blonde hair, glasses on my head as usual, in a very dark little study with lots of dark bookshelves behind me and a beautiful little bonsai tree next to me, keeping me company. I'm not going to talk for very long, but I just wanted to take you back to 2007, which is when Outside In World first began, and tell you a little bit about how Outside In World came across this book, and then introduce you to somebody that we'd really like to elaborate on why Braille is so important in books today. So yes, Outside in World began when promoting books in translation, children's books in translation was just as necessary as it is today, if not more so. And arguably harder than it is today, because this was long before the days of Instagram and Threads. And there was also very little research around the need for books in translation and their value to UK audiences. So Outside in World wanted to, in our first kind of decade of activity, very much wanted to look at highlighting the need for more books in translation, but also trying to identify great children's literature, translated children's literature from around the world, and bring it into the hands of UK audiences and of UK publishers. So that was how we came across this amazing book. It was through one of these projects, which we ran in 2014, called Reading the Way. And you can find out much more about that on our website, the Outside in World website. We came across it in the amazing original Spanish language. It had been published in, I think, 2012 by Grupo Amanuense. I'm sorry if I've said that completely wrong. And we were really thrilled to come across it. We were running a project, Reading the Way, which was very much about not just finding books from around the world and identifying them and bringing them to the UK, but also specifically inclusive books for that project. So we were interested in books that depicted disability in any kind of way. So that was how we came across this book. We then tracked it down. We'd heard about it. We went to Bologna. We tracked it down, and Deborah Halford from Outside in World and myself, and we absolutely fell in love with it. We fell in love with its unusual story, its distinctive artwork, everything that we first met in the book we loved. But of course, we needed it in English. So we asked the amazing Daniel Hahn to create an initial translation for us, which he did, entitled The Ghost Story. And that enabled us to then take the book through this project that we were running to lots of focus groups, to get their views and get their feedback, to make sure that they agreed with us about the book. So one of the focus groups that we ran was with the amazing New College Worcester. So this was 10 years ago. And we had it adapted. We had the book created for us into a more accessible format by the amazing Access to Books charity. They created it in large format and with Braille so that we could try the story out with students and staff at New College Worcester. And they, I'm very relieved to say, on this webinar, absolutely loved it as much as we did. They described it as stunning, unique, moving, exquisite. So the accolades went on. And they also loved the way the story could be read on lots of different levels. And they felt that was one of the very powerful aspects of the book, because it made it more suitable for lots of different children with different needs. And these students liked the way it highlighted Braille, which was something that they said they never came across in books. So they felt, and we felt, that it was unique in terms of bringing Braille out of the shadows and highlighting it in a way that we'd never seen before. So jump forward 10 years, Deborah and I are absolutely over the moon that this book has now been retranslated by Daniel Hahn again, and published, of course, by the amazing Lantana. And we're so delighted that it's now in the hands of lots of children around the UK. So that's the background. That's how Outside in World came to meet this amazing book. But as I say, I don't want to talk for long, because what Deborah and I felt about this webinar was that it's also an opportunity for us to hear more about why Braille is so important and highlighting Braille in this way, and particularly to hear from young people, as Sophie said at the start, and especially since actually 2024 marks 200 years since Braille was first created. So it feels particularly pertinent to be running this webinar and to be talking about Braille. But who better and more appropriate to tell us about Braille, and not only, of course, a Braille reader, but also somebody from New College Worcester. Obviously, she wasn't involved in the original project, because Kyla, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, is 16, and this project was 10 years ago. But she is at New College Worcester and is a passionate Braille reader. And I just should say before I introduce her that this is Kyla's first public speaking engagement, and it's also her first experience of Zoom, of the slightly unpredictable and obstinate qualities of Zoom, and she's still made it into the Zoom meeting, and we're incredibly pleased that she is. So Kyla is 16 and so knowledgeable about Braille. So Kyla, I'd like to introduce you, please, and ask you to tell us a little bit about why Braille is so important, both to you, but also to other visually impaired people. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how it's used today and why you feel it's so important that it's celebrated by the world at large, both within children's books and beyond children's books. And I will kind of hover here just in case you need me as well. So just say if you want me to chip in, otherwise I will keep quiet. So over to you, Kyla Lawrence from New College, Worcester.
Braille is important because it allows VI Braille readers like me to explore a whole new world. Reading Braille books for me is like having a holiday that I can carry around in my school bag. Reading Braille books allows me to explore whole new worlds and develop my vocabulary. When I read Braille, I always picture myself in the book as one of the characters. And Braille for other VI, reading is also a hobby. And if we didn't have Braille books today, then many hobbies, many people who love reading Braille, that hobby would be stripped away from them. So Braille is a good alternative to technology because if, for example, there was a power cut, then VI who want to read, and if they didn't have Braille books, they would be stripped of that hobby, and it would make a massive impact on their free time. I'm not sure what else to say.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Kyla. Could you tell us how else do you use it on a day-to-day basis? What kind of where would you find Braille, for example? Are you able to answer that one for me at all?
So I find Braille in all my worksheets that I do because although I can access technology, it's easier to have a Braille hard copy so that in case my document or email got deleted, then I am able to have a hard copy so that I can use a manual Perkins Brailler. And I also find it on many packagings, such as medicine boxes and a few food packages throughout supermarkets, and a few lifts have Braille numbers on them so that VI are able to find the right button so that they can get to the right floor. So Braille can be used for many things to make things better for VI.
That's so interesting. Thank you, Kyla. And am I right also that these days you can find it on things like games and Lego and board games and so on? Is that right? Would you know anything about that?
Yes, because Braille games such as Uno, you can get many Braille games off RNIB, and many games also might come with Braille instructions. So day by day, year by year, things are becoming more accessible so that VI can have more accessible free time hobbies and interests so that they don't feel like they're a level below everyone else and not as equal.
That's fantastic. And I guess a final question then, why would you say, or what would you like to say maybe about how important it is that, or the role that children's books could play in kind of showing Braille and just reminding people that Braille is there, that Braille exists, and maybe encouraging them to find out a bit more about Braille?
So Braille can can play a role in children's books in many, many different ways. For example, like the invisible story, it highlights Braille and the joy it can have for reading stories. So for many, many children, they might even not know that Braille exists. So the more stories that can be come up with that highlights Braille, the more understanding that more of the society will have around the world that Braille exists, and what us VI have to get and go through to be able to be as equal as those who are sighted.
That's just amazing. Thank you so much. And I know if everybody had their microphones switched on, they would be joining me in a massive round of applause. And congratulations to you, Kyla, for braving speaking, which is incredibly scary anyway for anyone, but especially aged 16. Absolutely amazing. And thank you for being such an expert on Braille and for sharing it with us. And I hope you'll just stick around now until the end of the webinar as well, in case there are any other questions. Thank you so much, Kyla, and thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, both of you. Thank you so much for teaching us more about the journey that this story has made into English. And thank you so much to Kyla for such a fascinating talk. And that was just wonderful. Thank you. And what I'm now going to do is our last speaker is translator Daniel Hahn. So I have highlighted you now. And if you could just talk to us a little bit about translating the book. Thank you.
Of course. Hi. I am a middle-aged man with shortish grey hair. I don't know why Jaime doesn't have grey hair. I'm very disappointed by that introduction of his. I do have nothing but grey hair and glasses and a green t-shirt. It's been really interesting hearing from all of you about the making of the book, and also from Kyla just then about such an interesting and important thing that I think a lot of us don't know very much about. I'm going to talk just briefly about the sorts of decisions that went into the translation that you heard me read earlier in our conversation. And the first thing to say is quite a general thing, but I hope was borne out when you heard it, that one of the things that I had to think about throughout the process of translating the book was what it was going to sound like when it was read aloud. It is almost always one of the most important considerations when you're working with picture books. Figuring out how to interact with the pictures is another, but thinking about what it's going to sound like when it's read aloud is an incredibly important part of the sorts of decisions that go into every little bit of a translation of a picture book. Mostly a picture book is going to be experienced by people who are listening to it read to them. The sound is very important. And so there were kind of general decisions to make, partly about what sort of language it was going to be. And there are a few things that are a little bit old-fashioned and a little bit kind of almost sort of high register sort of storytelling things in the language. And part of that was wanting to make the language a little bit rich, wanted to make the language something that you can imagine conjuring pictures in your mind, even if you're experiencing a book without pictures, that the language itself has to do a lot of work conjuring images in your mind. It also relates, I think, it relates to how the little story, who is our protagonist, relates to all of the other stories. And there's other stories that are the kind of old-fashioned, dragons and castles and whatever sort of stories. I feel like ours needs to have that sort of slightly kind of classic old-fashioned voice to it as well. So all that little that phrasing about, the comparison with the butterfly and the birds, the feathers of birds in people's faces, and the great fig tree, all those things are to do with sound as much as with meaning. Some of it is to do with, some of that comes down to really small decisions about how words sound. The very first page, it said something like stories can be as long as the word is lagarto in Spanish, which is often lizards, but also in some parts of Latin America is alligators, crocodiles. And part of the choice of lizard rather than alligator is that lizard begins with the letter L. and as long as lizards tasted much nicer when I read it aloud than as long as crocodiles or as long as alligators. And so there are a few decisions that were made just on that basis. That's why the translation has written in golden letters rather than told in, because told in golden sounds really horrible to me. And so some of those decisions are things that happened when I had done a draft and was testing it out. And testing it out means reading it aloud. The rhythm, this is also the case that I'm thinking about the rhythm of a sentence, often guided by what the Spanish will be doing. It sounds so beautiful. I'm not going to now because my Spanish accent is terrible, but I did read it to myself in private aloud in Spanish when I started translating it. And a lot of the time I was guided by the rhythm of Jaime's sentences, even if I had to do slightly different things to achieve that rhythm in English. So just for example, I mean, I will very quickly read a little bit in Spanish. The very first, the opening. Hay cuentos tan diferentes como, there are stories as different as, los plumajes de los pájaros, the feathers of the plumages of birds, las caras de las personas, the faces of people, or las incontables hojas de liguero, so the uncountable leaves of the tree. And so in Spanish it goes, patterns, the pattern is there are stories as different as the X of Y and the A of B and the Y of Z. They all have the same shape. I didn't like in English the plumages of birds and the faces of people and the leaves of the tree. It sounded a little bit kind of sing-song to me. So I changed it. My version says, there are stories as different as the feathers of birds or people's faces or the uncountable leaves on a great fig tree. So they're slightly different, but what I've done is I've put a little or in, repeated, and the repeated or gives you an idea that there's a little pattern there. Feathers of birds, or people's faces, or the uncountable leaves, blah, blah, blah. It's a slightly different tree as well, I should say. I feel like I have to apologize to Jaime and Wentu for all the changes. I've slightly changed your tree. One of the things that I thought about a lot, and I think about a lot in translation, is where, particularly for something to read aloud, it's where a phrase will end, what the last word or the last sound of a sentence or a phrase will be. In English, it's quite easy to come to rest at the end of a sentence on a noun, like the uncountable leaves on the great fig tree. Partly because English, unlike Spanish, we put our adjectives first. And so you have the last thing you say is your noun. You don't have to put the adjectives afterwards as you do in Spanish. But there are some places where in the Spanish, there is a noun followed by an adjective describing it that Jaime has used. But it's actually quite important that we end with the adjective because that's the most important thing in the sentence. So the letters that are gold is what the Spanish says. And a reader different and letters gold. The word different is much more important than the word reader. I could say someone who appeared who was a different reader and it was written in gold letters, but I wanted to end on the words that Jaime ended with, which are, in this case, adjectives are the important ones. So we end up with something which again sounds a little bit old-fashioned in English. Letters of gold, I think is what one of them is. And a reader who was different. And so it means that at the end of each of those phrases or those sentences, the last word, which is the word that kind of echoes in your ear a little bit in the pause before you move into the next sentence, is the most interesting and important word, and is the word that, even though Spanish has a different structure, those are the words that Jaime is using. In fact, I did slightly change the thing with written in letters of gold. I think I actually moved to the end of a sentence, which it isn't in Spanish at all. I think I'm slightly going for cheap effects, I think. But anyway, but it's also why there are stories that are as different as the feathers of birds, rather than birds' feathers, which is the way we would simplify it quite often in English. I thought I would just share just really quickly a couple of sentences just as an example of the things that I was trying to do. And there's a bit where it's about the protagonist story, and the Spanish goes as follows. Our story is listening to the other stories. El cuento los escuchaba, the story listened to them, desde las sombras, from the shadows, suspirando de admiración, sighing from, it's not quite admiration, but sort of marveling or wondering or something like that. Él quería ser como ellos. He wanted to be like them. In English, I have to make a choice about a pronoun. Is the story he? In Spanish, it has to be he because the noun cuento is gendered. I have to decide, am I going to give this, am I going to gender the story like Spanish? I end up with the story being it, because we can do that in English. But I also didn't then want to remove the sort of warmth and the humanness of this story. So one of the things I changed was, instead of saying this story, it becomes our little story. And that immediately replaces some of the warmth that we have lost. So it's still sort of personified, it has that warmth. I broke up that first sentence. So the first sentence I read is actually all one sentence in Spanish. And I broke it up a little bit to make it easier to read aloud. I'm thinking about people who read aloud who may not be very confident readers aloud. So I've broken it up. I have a couple of commas. I'll read you the final version in a second. And breaking it up also allowed me to think about which word I was going to end on. And I wanted to end on the word side, because I want the last line, the following line, which in Spanish is él quería ser como ellos. He wanted to be like them. I wanted that to sound as much like speech. And again, speech makes it a little easier to read aloud. So the English ends up being, our little story listened from the shadows, comma, filled with wonder, comma, and it sighed. How it wanted to be like them. How it wanted to be, and there's an exclamation mark, which is not in the Spanish, and it's just me being delinquent, is giving that a sort of spoken voice. I'll just say two very quick things, because I said I would do this in 10 minutes. One of which is, a couple of people, I think Jaime first mentioned the title is different, when she alluded to this as well. And one of the issues we had, it was translated as ghost story originally, as Alex said, but one of the problems we have, and this comes back to Spanish adjectives actually, that ghost story in the Spanish, ghost is they're basically as an adjective to describe what kind of story it is. It is a story that is a ghost. The problem is, in English, a ghost story makes you think it is a story about ghosts, a scary story, which in Spanish would be a Cuento Fantasma or something like that. There is that kind of possibility of reading it both ways. In Spanish and English, ghost stories sounded too much like, where are all the ghosts though? Why isn't this a story about a haunted house or something, which is what a ghost story sounds like? So we came up, I think it might have been Alice at Lantana who thought of Invisible Story, which I really like. The fact that I really like it suggests to me that it was probably her rather than me who thought of it, because I almost never like my titles. So I will give Alice credit for this one. And the other thing which I'll just say, which just as a matter of interest, which Alice and I also talked about in the editing process, which is not something that I hope anyone would necessarily notice when they're looking at the translation, but it's an interesting constraint when you're working on picture books, that there was a draft of this in which the pictures are described as being colorful rather than shining, and in which the books argue about which one is the people's favorite, rather than which one is the most popular, and in which the girl calls the story marvelous rather than wonderful. And Alice pointed out to me that the word colorful and the word favorite and the word marvelous are all spelt in different ways depending where you are in the English-speaking world. And we immediately made a sort of determination about the sorts of constraints we're going to impose on ourselves, because, I would certainly use words like that in a grown-up book, but if you're thinking about a picture book, maybe being used by a child at sort of learning to read age, having words with variant spellings is not terribly helpful. And so actually, I just mentioned that because I think it's an interesting way that in which the kind of constraints you don't think about, like how are we going to not use the words colour, favourite and marvellous, just to do with the spelling eccentricity of the Anglophone world, actually feed into some of the decisions that went into which words we did use. That's it. I will stop talking. I'm slightly past.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating and really interesting to learn about all the different decisions and the process. So thank you. And I think throughout that idea of imagination and the importance of stories and conjuring things up in your mind has really sort of shone through. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fiddle around trying to spotlight everybody, but we do have some questions already, and we've got a little bit of time, if that's okay, if you can stay. And the first question that I can see here in the chat is for Wen. If Theodora in the chat is asking, how do these images work with mass production? And I suppose she's also kind of thinking about that question of the texture of the images, which is so important. If you could just chat to us about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so the original publisher, Editorial Amanuense, is a pretty small publisher that started in Guatemala. So the original idea when they contacted me was to make this book directly in Braille, and also she showed me as an example, I'm not sure of the name of the book, but it's a book that's in all black, and it has the textures, raised textures that are transparent, but you can touch them. And that was the original idea, that the book will have relief on it. But because of budget restrictions, it wasn't possible at the time, so they decided to publish it first, like just normal regular book, flat, and it would be a story about awareness of different kinds of readers. But they were unable, but I think that they were able to produce it, print it in Braille in Korea. I'm not sure because that part is from the publisher. But yeah, in Spanish, unfortunately, we're not able to do it as originally planned in like relief for the illustrations and in Braille because of budget.
Yes, I should say also, I think on the front cover of The Invisible Story, it is raised, isn't it? The print on the front cover. Thank you so much. That's really fascinating. I'll ask colleagues to help me if I miss stuff, but I think Jill asked about the question of the changing of the title from Invisible to Ghost, but I feel like you've definitely answered that one. And then Patricia has a question for Kyla. You mentioned imagining yourself as a character in the books you read. What about a book that helps you imagine this? In The Invisible Story, was there a particular element that helped you to imagine?
So, particularly in The Invisible Story, the parts that I could imagine the most was the library and the finding of the book. So, there are certain elements in certain books. For example, also the Harry Potter books with all the descriptive language, because with descriptions, it's much easier to picture in your head what something's like in a book.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. And then we have Alice in the chat from Lantana who's saying that apparently it was Daniel who came up with the name Invisible Story. And then Suzanne, Kyla, we're making you work hard here. My apologies. We have a question from Suzanne. Are you satisfied with the production of children's and young adult literature in Braille today? And in your opinion, is there anything that could be improved?
I'm definitely satisfied because there's definitely a wide range of books, children's books and young literature out there that are accessible by Braille. And to be honest, there's not really much that I could think of that could be improved, because I think that things are going pretty well for Braille literature.
Okay, fantastic. Lovely. Thank you. Alex, you have a question.
I was just going to add that I think it's worth noting also that publishers are getting much better in the UK at making books available in different formats. And Lantana have worked with RNIB Bookshare to make a more accessible version available as well of The Invisible Story. So I know we had that. Kyla, you've accessed that as well, haven't you? So there is a Braille a large print version available. So, and also if people ever want to see the original version that Deborah and I created for our focus groups back in the day, 10 years ago, that's also on display at the amazing University of Portsmouth exhibition, where we have our exhibition of outside in world literature, books in translation. So there's an amazing exhibition there at the moment based on The Invisible Story and other books, accessible books like that. So yeah, sorry, it's quite a long edition there, but there's so much we could talk about, isn't there? Thank you.
And Cynthia now has a question for Wen. Did you use physical paper in the creating the art, then scan it for production, or was it some of it digital then combined?
It was at that time it was purely hand cut and hand painted in physical paper, and then I sent it to the publisher. They usually have a very good photographer because at that the paper cut art sometimes it's very hard when you scan it, it flattens it out. So the relief, like the shade, the shadows and everything doesn't really pop up. So even with photographs, it flattens out a little bit, but not as much. It's actually the oh, wait, I think I'm having, do you still see me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. It's like, I think the power went out for a second. And so yes, so it was physical paper and physically like hand cut and hand torn, hand painted, and then I sent it in for photos.
Thank you. Fantastic. And Kyla, I should just say that Suzanne has thanked you very much for your answer in the chat. And then we have a question from Patricia. Perhaps I could let you read your question, Patricia.
Sure, my question is for Jaime. I think you might have read it, but yeah, how do you feel about the journey of this book from your original sense of being othered, coming from an outlying region of Costa Rica in San Jose in the capital, to the worlds that your book has reached now and in its different incarnations? I can see by the smile on your face, but I want to hear it from you.
Thank you, Patricia. I am amazed. I'm really, and now hearing all the work of Daniel making marvels with the translation, I'm most amazed, more amazed. But I have to thank. I didn't thank enough to Valia Livenson and Amanuense, the editors, because when I started to publish with Amanuense, I didn't knew Valia, and they were from Guatemala. I was from Costa Rica, and I started to send books to them, and they started to publish in another country. So the Cuento Fantasma, the original Spanish version of this book, I didn't see it in Costa Rica. I see it. I could publish here some years after the book was already issued. So this book born as a traveler, you know, and then I have here in my home the translations to Korean, to Japanese, I don't believe it yet. I'm very amazed by that. It's incredible. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you so
I
much.
don't know if I can just add that, sorry, that at some point we're living in Hanoi in Vietnam, And there's a big Korean expat community there. And this Korean mom, she came to me and she's like, is this you, the one that illustrated? And she was holding the book in Korean. And it was my first time seeing the book in Korean. It was pretty moving to see the book in a different language, in a different, like at the other end of the world. It was pretty fun.
Amazing. Thank you. We have now a question from Suzanne for Daniel. You mentioned the importance of sound in translation. Did you try to pay specific attention to the musicality of the language because of the emphasis on other senses in the Invisible Story?
Thank you, Suzanne. That's a really interesting question. The truth is, it's a thing that I think about quite a lot with picture books, whatever they are about and whatever the kind of preoccupations are. It's true that there is and partly it came up in the conversation earlier today, this sense that this idea that you have your other senses and that kind of you're aware of them in a different way. And when talked about kind of that experience of going into a room and getting things from that space that are to do with what it smells like and what it sounds like and that kind of thing. And so certainly in the case of this book, thinking about it as something that is not just dependent on pictures in a way that I think we think of picture books as being very picture-led. The first experience of those of us who look at picture books with our eyes is the pictures more than the words. And this is obviously very different in lots of ways. But I do think it's an important thing to think about almost always with picture books, where so often the experience is a child might be looking at the pictures, but they will usually be listening to the words spoken to them. Often the gaps between the words and the pictures are also gaps between what they get through those two different senses. And so I do always, with something that is designed to be read aloud, I do always test it by reading aloud. I always tell early career translators that they absolutely have to do that with all of their work, and everything you do, you need to read aloud. And I actually don't do that myself because I'm very lazy. But with picture books, I always absolutely do. And I often find myself making decisions based entirely on sound and on how many syllables a word has and on what the last syllable of the word of the phrase is going to be and what sounds like what other thing. So yes, it's true. It's true about this book, but I think also anything that is going to be that children are going to listen to, but also other people are going to have to read. It needs to be speakable. You don't want there to be things that kind of catch you when you're speaking. Picture books are this slightly weird form of art, which is designed mostly to be read aloud by people who are not like professional read alouders. So it's not like writing a script for a play or a screenplay or something. And so I'm often thinking about what are the things that will make it easy for someone who may not be a confident reader, who may not be confident with the language, to be able to read it well, to be able to animate it and feel comfortable with the sound of it. So that's always part of it for me.
Fantastic, thank you. That was fascinating. I think we should do one more question that we have in the chat, and then I'm going to give everyone a nice break. But Oscar in the chat has a question for Jaime, because we've been thinking a lot about process. How long did it take you to create this story in Spanish?
No. Thank you for the question. The publishers know that I conceived this my children books more like a poems. I maybe it was like an hour or so to write the entire story, because for me it's like one feeling, and the story writes itself like it's a moment of illumination, and then some weeks polishing and carving some words that doesn't fit, and but the story itself, like an hour, and then weeks or months, fine tuning.
Thank you. And I can see when in the chat said it took me way longer than 1 hour to illustrate. But that's impressive. Okay. So it's now falls to me to just say thank you so much to all of our speakers. That was just a really fascinating insight into this story in some of its manifestations and the travels that it has gone on, and it was lovely to hear from you all, and thank you for joining